On a stormy night in a divided town, a brave teenage girl dives into a raging river to save a drowning billionaire. What happens next will change both their lives forever. The water was ice cold, the current unforgiving, but Maya did not hesitate. She fought against a raging river, her heart pounding as she reached the man sinking beneath the waves. When she finally pulled him to shore, gasping for breath, she realized who he was. Richard Sterling, the billionaire no one dared to cross. But as he lay unconscious in the storm, one question loomed. How had he ended up in the river in the first place? Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell for more incredible stories. Maya was a teenage girl with a heart full of courage and kindness. She believed in doing what was right, even when the world around her seemed unfair. Growing up in a small riverside town, she had learned to be strong. Life was not easy here, especially for someone like her. The town was beautiful, with its flowing river and old brick buildings, but beneath its charm was a divide. The wealthy lived in grand houses on the hills, enjoying their luxuries, while working-class families struggled. Maya and her mother lived in a modest home near the river. Her mother worked long hours, and Maya helped however she could. She had a part-time job at a small cafe, where she often heard town gossip. Lately, there was one name on everyone's lips: Richard Sterling, a billionaire known for his ruthless business dealings. He had arrived for a private retreat, but no one knew why. Some said he was hiding from a scandal. Others believed he was just another rich man who thought he was above everyone else. People whispered about him, calling him cold-hearted, a man with no compassion. Maya had never met him, but she had no idea their paths were about to cross in a way that would change both their lives forever. Maya spent most evenings working at the small riverside cafe, where she served coffee and listened to the endless town gossip. Lately, Richard Sterling's name had come up more than usual. Some customers speculated about his fortune, while others whispered about his cold and distant nature. Maya never paid much attention. Rich people's problems had nothing to do with her. That night, the sky was darker than usual, heavy with rain. The storm had been building all evening, and by the time Maya stepped outside, the wind howled through the empty streets. As she pulled her jacket tighter, something caught her eye: a figure near the riverbank. Before she could react, the person slipped and disappeared beneath the churning water. Her heart raced. Without thinking, she ran toward the river. The current was strong, the waves crashing violently, but she did not hesitate. She dived in, the freezing water knocking the air from her lungs. Fighting against the current, she reached the struggling figure, wrapping her arms around him and using every ounce of strength to pull him toward the shore. Coughing and shivering, she dragged him onto the muddy bank. As lightning flashed, she finally saw his face and froze. Richard Sterling. His chest was still. He was not breathing. Panic surged through her, but she pushed it aside and pressed her hands against his chest, beginning CPR. "Come on, breathe," she gasped, her voice barely audible over the storm. The rain pounded against her skin, the wind howling in her ears. Her heart pounded as she kept pushing, refusing to let him die. Richard suddenly gasped for air, his body jolting as he coughed up water. Maya exhaled in relief, but before she could speak, he looked around with dazed, unfocused eyes. He did not thank her. He did not even seem to realize what had happened. He just lay there, chest rising and falling unevenly, as sirens wailed in the distance. By the time the paramedics arrived, the riverside was buzzing with onlookers. Whispers spread like wildfire. Who pulled him out? Why was he in the river? Some believed it was an accident. Others suspected something darker. Maya stood to the side, unnoticed as the medics lifted Richard onto a stretcher. She should have felt proud, but instead, uncertainty crept in. Later that night, lying in bed, she stared at the ceiling. Had she done the right thing? The man she saved was no hero. He was known for shutting down businesses, ruining lives without a second thought. Would he have saved her if the roles were reversed? She did not know, but no matter who he was, she could not have let him drown. Across town, in his massive estate, Richard sat alone, wrapped in a blanket, his hands trembling. The memory of the cold water, the suffocating darkness, it played over and over in his mind. He barely remembered the girl who saved him, but something about her haunted him. His lips parted, and in a hoarse whisper he muttered, "She saved me." Richard was not the type of man to dwell on emotions, but ever since that night, he could not shake the memory of nearly drowning, or the girl who saved him. He was too weak to search for her himself, so he sent his assistant to find out who she was. It did not take long before her name was everywhere. Maya, a teenage girl from the working class side of town. The news caught on fast. Headlines praised her bravery, calling her a hero, but not everyone in town was impressed. Some whispered that she should have minded her own business, that people like her had no place getting involved with a man as powerful as Richard Sterling. The divide in the town had never felt sharper. At his estate, Richard sat by the fire, watching the news reports. He should have been relieved to know who she was, but instead, he felt something else: curiosity. He had spent his life surrounded by people who only cared about his wealth, but she had risked her life for his without asking for anything in return. He had to meet her. His assistant made the call. When Maya heard the invitation, she froze. Richard Sterling wanted to see her? It made no sense. What could a man like him possibly want from her? She was not sure she wanted to find out. After days of hesitation, Maya finally decided to go. If nothing else, she wanted to know why he had called for her. The estate was larger than she imagined. Grand gates, endless gardens, a mansion so massive it barely seemed real. She followed the butler inside, where Richard sat in a leather chair by the window. He looked better than he had the night she pulled him from the river, but there was still a tiredness in his face. "You saved my life," he said, his voice low but firm. Maya shrugged. Someone had to. He studied her for a long moment, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a check, a reward. Maya barely glanced at it before shaking her head. "I did not do it for money." Richard hesitated. That answer was new to him. People always wanted something: money, connections, power. But this girl? She just walked into his house, looked him in the eye, and turned down a fortune like it meant nothing. Meanwhile, outside the estate, tension in the town was growing. Some people celebrated Maya's bravery, but others resented the attention she was getting. A local businessman, jealous of Richard's influence, started stirring up rumors. He whispered that Maya was only pretending to be humble, that she had her own selfish reasons for getting involved. The more people talked, the more the town divided, and Maya had no idea how much worse it was about to get. Despite their differences, Richard found himself drawn to Maya's honesty. He invited her back to the estate a few days later, and this time they talked. At first, their conversation was guarded, but as the hours passed, Richard revealed things he rarely admitted. He spoke about the betrayals that had shaped him, the people who had used him, the reason he had stopped believing in kindness. Maya listened carefully before shaking her head. "Not everyone is like that." Richard scoffed. "You are young. You do not understand how the world works." "I understand enough," she said. "If the world is so cruel, why did I save you?" That silenced him. For the first time in years, he did not have an answer. Just as things seemed to be shifting, Richard's assistant burst into the room, looking pale. "We found something," he said, holding out a report. Richard took it, his eyes scanning the words. His expression darkened. Maya leaned forward. "What is it?" The assistant hesitated before speaking. "The night you fell into the river, it may not have been an accident." Richard stared at the report, his grip tightening. The evidence was clear. His fall into the river had not been an accident. Someone had tried to kill him. Maya watched his face closely. She had no reason to trust him, but something in his eyes told her this was real. This was fear. Not the fear of a powerful man losing money or influence, but the fear of a man who had come inches from death and realized someone had wanted it that way. "Who would want you dead?" she asked. Richard exhaled sharply. "Take your pick. Business rivals, former partners, even people in this town." Maya frowned. "But why here? Why not back in the city?" That question hung in the air. Richard had come to this quiet town to escape the pressures of his world. But instead of finding peace, someone had tried to make sure he never left. They went through everything he remembered from that night. The storm, The footsteps near the riverbank, the sudden impact before the world went dark. Someone had been there. Someone had pushed him. The real question was, who? And how far were they willing to go to finish what they started? As Richard quietly investigated, the town's attitude toward him shifted. Whispers turned to glares. Conversation stopped when he entered a room. It was as if people knew he was digging, and they did not like it. Maya noticed it too. The people who had once ignored Richard now seemed to resent him even more. But she also saw something else. Fear. Some of the wealthier townspeople, especially those with ties to local businesses, seemed nervous. Despite warnings, she stayed by Richard's side, helping him piece together the truth. The deeper they dug, the more they uncovered. A network of corruption, business deals made in secret, powerful figures pulling strings behind the scenes. And all of it somehow led back to Richard. His presence in town had disrupted something, and someone had decided to get rid of him for good. Then the threat started. One evening, as Maya walked home from the estate, a man stepped out from the shadows. His voice was calm, but his words carried weight. Stay out of things that do not concern you. Maya did not flinch. I saved his life. That concerns me. The man gave a slow shake of his head. This is bigger than you. Walk away while you can. But Maya had already made her choice. She was not walking away. The tension finally snapped on a stormy evening at the riverbank, the same place where everything had begun. Richard had followed the final clue, and it led him straight to the person responsible. As he stood there, staring at the face of his betrayer, the weight of it all sank in. Someone he had once trusted had been behind this from the start. Maya stood nearby, her heart pounding. She had faced danger before, but this was different. This was not just about saving a life. It was about fighting for the truth. As accusations flew, the betrayer tried to justify their actions. You do not belong here, Richard. You never did. Richard clenched his fists. So you tried to kill me? I did what had to be done. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Richard made a choice, one that would not only decide his fate, but the future of the town itself. Maya held her breath, knowing that after the night, nothing would ever be the same. The truth came crashing down like a thunderstorm over the town. The person behind Richard's attempted murder was exposed, and the revelation sent shockwaves through the community. It was not just about greed. It was about control. Richard's presence had threatened the corrupt system, and someone had decided to silence him. The confrontation was tense. Richard stood face to face with a mastermind, the weight of betrayal heavy in the air. He could have used his power to crush them, to take revenge. But instead, he did something no one expected. He chose justice. Authorities were called. Evidence was presented, and the person responsible was taken away in handcuffs. The town, once divided by whispers and resentment, now stood united in shock. Maya found herself at the center of attention. Reporters called her a hero. The people who had once doubted her now spoke her name with admiration. But as she looked at the chaos around her, she did not feel like a hero. She had simply done what was right. In the days that followed, Richard disappeared from the public eye. But he had not left. He was planning something. When he finally reappeared, it was not with another business deal or grand statement. Instead, he announced something that no one saw coming. He was investing in the town, not for profit, not for power, but for change. With his wealth, he launched programs for underprivileged youth, scholarships, mentorships, opportunities that had never existed before. And at the heart of it all was Maya. She had risked her life to save his. Now, he wanted to return a favor, not with money, but with something far greater, a future. At first, the town struggled to believe it. Could a man like Richard Sterling truly change? But action spoke louder than words. As the weeks passed, so did the doubts. For the first time in his life, Richard felt something he had never known: redemption. Maya, too, had learned something. Courage was not just about running into danger. It was about believing that people could change, even the ones she least expected. One evening, Maya stood at the riverbank, the same spot where everything had begun. The water was calm now, the storm long gone, but she knew the ripples of that night would last forever. She had not just saved a man, she had changed his life. And in doing so, she had changed her own. Footsteps approached behind her. She turned to see Richard standing there, his expression no longer cold, no longer guarded. "You are still thinking about that night," he said. She nodded. It is strange how one moment can change everything. Richard looked out at the river. "I used to believe that power was the only thing that mattered. But I was wrong. It was never about power. It was about the people we choose to be." Maya met his gaze. No words were needed. They both understood. As the camera pulled back, the town stretched beyond them, no longer divided but whole. The river flowed on, carried with the story of a girl who refused to stand by, a man who found redemption, and the undeniable truth that one act of courage can change the course of an entire life.